Good afternoon. Thanks for sharing your lunch hour with us again. My name is Paul Johnson. I'm the program manager for our Cybersecurity for Small Business program here through the Wyoming SBDC. And today we are going to talk about cybersecurity insurance, who needs it and how it can protect your business. Our monthly webinar in April will be on the 16th at noon, where we will be walking attendees through a live cybersecurity self-assessment. Our program assistants have put together a really nice streamlined self-assessment so you can get a good sense of where you are with your cyber readiness in your organization. So before we get started, I want to talk about our partners. We are, of course, a part of the Wyoming SBDC network. You can join us at wyomingsbdc.org. We have advisors all across the state, no cost, confidential business advising in any stage of your business. This particular program, the cybersecurity program, is fully funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration. We are hosted by the University of Wyoming. So here's where we're going today. We're going to talk about what cybersecurity insurance does cover, what it does not cover, some common reasons claims are denied, and how to stay insurable, and look at maybe some estimated costs of cybersecurity insurance, which of course will vary widely based on your own situation. And joining us today is Rob Zotti from Hub International. Rob is a expert in cybersecurity insurance. So Rob's going to be doing most of the talking today. I'm just going to kind of set things up for him and let him knock things out of the park here with his expertise. So Rob, can you address some of these issues here? What is cybersecurity insurance? Who might need it? Who doesn't need it? And then maybe how to search for and select a provider.
So in general, cyber insurance is a specialized policy used to help businesses mitigate financial loss from cyber attacks like data breaches, cybercrime, ransomware, or network outages. And pretty much anybody who is connected to the internet in some way, shape, or form is exposed and should have cyber coverage in place. In general, a number of companies I've seen that said we've only got a couple people who use the internet, we don't need it, and yet a few months later they fall victim to a cyber attack, and costly cyber attack. So it's really anybody with connection to the internet really should consider some level of protection with cyber coverage.
What kind of questions should people ask a provider, or how do they go about selecting a provider that has the expertise to put together the right policy for them?
Just general questions on, how familiar are they with the exposure? Maybe ask for references, clients that they've worked with in the past, maybe just some companies they work with, and what they're able to offer. Just general questions you'd ask, I guess, any insurance provider that you're kind of trying to verify knows how to meet your needs.
Can you talk a little bit about the areas that cyber insurance commonly covers? I've just thrown a couple of ideas up here.
Yep, and you've got the ideas there. And then what that typically will cover is security breach expenses. For example, forensics expense, digging into the computer, your system to find out what happened. Where did the attack come from? Where did the malware come from? The virus, etc. There are some notification expenses you may be legally liable for to notify those who may have their information compromised. Call center expenses, post-event monitoring expenses, and public relations expenses. Extortion threats are big, ransomware, and social engineering. We look at phishing, spear phishing, those types of attacks. Funds transfer fraud is another one. The biggest claim, the most we see as far as claims, come from social engineering and ransomware. Those are commonly what's covered, and really the number one losses that we've seen and continue to see an increase in over the last few years. Social engineering is just a huge.
So I have business interruption up here. I suppose that is a totally separate thing from some of these other items, but how do we handle that?
That is covered as well. So any loss of business income that you may experience due to a cyber attack, there are coverages for business interruption. You can get coverage for hardware replacement as well. So damage that we call it bricking. If a virus damages your system, you can no longer use it. That will cover those bricking exposures and cover for hardware replacement if need be.
All right, so what are some things that are not covered by cyber insurance?
What's not covered is, like bodily injury. That's going to be covered under your separate policies through general liability in that. Any disruption of normal computer function or network operation due to insufficient capacity or to process transactions. Any disruption of internet service, any external telecommunication network. So if it's a disruption of service not caused by a cyber event, malware, virus, something like that, there's no coverage. Surge of power, reduction of power, that's usually not covered. And any actual alleged or oral or written publication of material, if done by an insured or at an insured's direction with knowledge of its falsity. So purposely doing something is not going to be covered as an insured. And in any criminal dishonest act, of course, is not of the insured would not be covered. And no, typically they do not cover costs to upgrade or improve your computer system after a loss. They'll replace it with what you had, but if there's any other upgrades that need to be done, that's going to be underdone. Typically,
one of the things we stress through this program is that cyber insurance certainly cannot replace your reputation among your customers, for sure. So what we try to do is put mitigation measures and readiness measures in place to prevent that from happening in the first place. But it may happen to you.
Coverages within a policy too that will help with that reputational damage. So there are some expenses you can purchase for PR to let the public know you've been attacked. You're doing all you can to keep everyone's information safe, as well as after the fact to help in PR to build your reputation back. So there are some coverages built into certain policies as well to help mitigate some of those damages for reputational damage.
So even down to marketing materials and those kinds of things, postcards even? Okay.
Correct.
What if, and I want to urge our attendees here, if you have questions as we go along, you can answer those dynamically. So if you want to pop those in the questions tab up there, I'll try to monitor that as we go along here. What about, Rob, if it's an inside job, if it's a current former employee who may have credentials that allow them to, do a malicious act on the system and cause damage? Is that covered under a policy as well?
It is. You get some of those employees who may compromise your system, steal data or information, inject a virus to try and exact revenge because they were maybe felt they were wrongfully terminated or something along those lines. Yes, that is covered. One of our biggest exposures, or one of the biggest exposures, are the people who use and get into our systems and have access to the information, either doing it maliciously or just an error. Human error is one of the biggest concerns that we have when dealing with cyber exposure. And that's why education and educating your employees is vitally important in helping mitigate those risks.
Yeah, we stress over and over in our program and are advising that really over 90% of attacks are due to human behavior or making the wrong decision. So what's the nexus with law enforcement in those sorts of situations, and how does your cyber insurance policy come into play there?
Well, in any event, you do want to, if you have an event, you contact law enforcement and your insurance carrier immediately to get the ball rolling and help try to eliminate as much loss as we can. Now, law enforcement, their focus is to find out who did it and to prosecute them criminally. With your insurance carrier, their goal is to find out what happened, how do we fix it, and how do we minimize the impact to your business. So for business survivability, business continuation, your insurance carrier is going to be the one on your team to help bring you back to where you were prior to a loss. So there's kind of two different functions there between insurance carrier and, say, law enforcement.
This is probably a terrible question, but I'm sure people wonder, what's a common time frame for processing and paying out a claim? I'm sure it varies wildly based on the situations.
It's going to vary. I really couldn't give a time frame. Once the claim is submitted, the carriers will start looking into your system, find out what happened, what caused this, try to mitigate any other damages and lessen any further damage. I've seen claims. We've had a hospital here in Wyoming, Gillette, I believe, a number of years ago, who was shut down for several days before they could get up and running. City of Green River was compromised earlier this year, and it took several months for them to get everything back up and running again. So it really depends on the severity of the claim, the extent of damage, and that it's really hard to put a timeline on.
Yeah, but I guess the message is expect some sort of forensic process to take place, no matter what it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about why a claim might be denied. In other words, what are the client's responsibilities for being in good shape to recover?
Well, so in order to qualify for insurance, cyber insurance, you're going to have some certain things in place. Many carriers will want you to have some kind of, make sure you have virus protection, firewalls. You're upgrading your operating systems regularly. You're doing your system upgrades, security upgrades. There's some sort of employee security training and multi-factor authentication for remote access or administrative access. Where you see claims potentially denied is if you're answering on your application that you do all this stuff, have a claim and find out that is not the case, that you haven't been using multi-factor authentication or doing your security updates. That has potential to have the carrier to decline paying for the claim because you weren't doing what you said or promised you would be doing. And that's usually the basis that I see a lot of it if you're just not implementing those proper security measures.
So when you sign that policy, you are basically certifying that you have these measures in place.
Yeah, most policies will ask, do you use multi-factor authentication? Do you encrypt your files, email files, or sensitive documents? If you're doing backups, are those backups encrypted? So depending on your answer to a lot of those, if you answer them dishonestly, or there's potential for declination in a claim situation.
There may be some cases where a client doesn't even understand what some of those measures are. And so I think the advice here is to ask an expert or educate yourself on some of those measures before you sign on the dotted line.
Oh, exactly. If there's questions on any kind of application or things you're being answered, if you don't know for sure, contact your IT person, ask your agent, well, what is this? What do I need to do or have in place? You maybe found that you actually do have it in place. You just calling it something maybe a little different. But always, if you don't know for sure, don't answer the question, or be upfront and say, I don't know.
You can always call us too.
Yeah, it could end up biting you.
Let's talk about a typical attack, and that's ransomware. Can you kind of give us the outline of what a ransomware attack might look like and how your insurance will respond to that?
So what those typically look like is an email. You'll get an email or a communication from the hacker stating they've compromised your system and they have a monetary demand. Basically, you pay them to get a security code to break that encryption and get your information back. We've seen this with oil pipeline, gas pipeline a number of years ago. There's been a number of large companies who've been attacked with ransomware, and that's basically the hackers are holding your data hostage for ransom. Honest hackers and dishonest hackers out there, they're the insurance companies and how they pay these. It seems counterproductive to pay a ransom to get your information back. It only encourages more activity. It encourages the hackers to go out because they know they're going to get paid. I have worked with underwriters in Lloyd's of London, and one of their comments to that is, how do they determine whether or not to pay the ransom? There's enough knowledge out there to know who certain groups are that usually do these attacks, and whether or not they do provide that encryption key once ransom is paid, or if they do not. That's what I mean by the honest hackers or the dishonest. Though some of the carriers know typically whether or not they're going to get what they pay for. Some hackers, you pay the ransom and then they're gone. You never see your money again. You don't get an encryption key. It's over with. The downside to all of this is not only do they collect the ransom, but now they have all the information they hijacked and they'll be selling it on the dark web. Same thing with, if your carrier does pay the ransom, you get your encryption key, get your information back, but the hackers still have that information and more than likely are selling it on the other side. It's a nasty game.
Yeah. And if we know how the bad hackers work, they've probably already sold your information before they've asked for your ransom.
It's gone. Yeah.
Well, let's say somebody has cyber insurance and they are meeting all the requirements of it. How often do they have to renew that, and do they have to be reassessed for those renewals? And what kind of questions will they be asked during those periods?
Yeah, typically they're a 1-year policy. So it's an annual policy like your general liability or property or auto policy. And carriers will usually submit or request a renewal update application, generally looking to see if anything has changed in your operations. Do you still comply with their requirements for, are you doing your upgrades to multi-factor authentication, encrypting your files, things like that. Just general kind of simpler process for renewal. They just want to update some information. Are there increase in revenues? Is there an increase in the number of employees or those who have access to information? It's really going to depend on, too, the class of business you are. If you're a financial institution, healthcare, they're going to be a little bit more conservative and underwrite that a little bit harder than they would, say, a mom and pop retail store on Main Street. So it really kind of depends on your industry that you're in as well, as to what could be asked or what the process is.
And we're seeing more professional organizations requiring at least self-assessments and self-certifications. For example, the IRS requires all financial institutions to have a written information security document or plan called a WISP. The American Bar Association has published guidelines for attorneys and how they should handle client data. Anybody doing government contracting now has to comply with CMMC or NIST 800-171. We've had some subcontractors in those areas. And basically, from looking at all of those requirements, they're all pretty similar. And if you are meeting your professional organization's requirements, you're probably meeting the requirements of getting cybersecurity insurance, would you say?
Yeah, in general, yes, I think so. Because a lot of those, especially the governmental contracts and that you have, they're going to have some pretty strict requirements on what you need to comply with. And the associations have a pretty good idea. So if you're complying with a lot that they have, more than likely you'll fit into an insurance program with those.
So we've already talked about this a little bit, but you've talked about multi-factor authentication. I mean, probably VPN required if you're accessing data from a mobile device, antivirus being up to date, software updates, password management and hygiene. Any other cyber readiness, cybersecurity measures you can think of that we haven't mentioned so far that would be required for a policy?
Backup of critical data regularly, and keeping it for extended periods of time, not just maybe once a week updating the backup and keeping it for only a week or maybe a month. A lot of times a virus will get into your system and lay dormant for weeks or months at a time, and then it's triggered. And that's when you notice you have an issue. So if you go back to a month's worth of backup, but that virus was actually installed 3 months ago, that backup you're using is going to contain the same virus. So you want to make sure you're kind of keeping it for more of an extended period of time in your backups. That's one of the biggest things is backup, regularly updating security patches in your software. Anytime Windows comes out with an update, security update, update it immediately. The reason they're coming out with that update is they've noticed or they've had an issue which provided maybe a backdoor to hackers, and they're wanting to get that fixed as soon as possible. Endpoint protection with firewalls and that, keep that up to date regularly as well. Pretty much everything you had said is really what you want to do. Constant just employee training, keeping top of the mind of employees on what can happen and what to look out for.
We talk a lot about having an incident response plan in place, a written plan that is reviewed and practiced with your staff regularly. Is that a requirement for coverage?
It's going to be dependent on the carrier and really maybe the industry. For like your smaller exposures, your little retail contractors, things like that, they may not really require an incident response plan. But if you're getting into healthcare, financial, we're taking a lot of personal information from others, customers, that may become more of a requirement. They want to know that you have some kind of a plan in place on how to react when an attack occurs. Okay. It's going to be dependent on the type of risk you are.
We had a quick question from somebody when we were talking about processing claims and recovery. You mentioned City of Green River took months to recover from their attack.
Yeah, they. I can't remember when it happened, but I know in talking to those involved, for them to rebuild their system and get everything back up and running, it took a couple months. Yeah, it took some time.
That's a lot of time to not have business as usual in place, for sure.
Yeah, the cost associated with that and everything else, it can be pretty devastating to a business.
So, Rob, a lot of our clients, we deal with small businesses, but a lot of our small businesses are the smallest of the small, 1 or 2 person shops. And in that case, let's say it's a retail operation not dealing with a lot of online customer data, but certainly needs to keep their POS systems going and any online ordering that they're doing. What's a cost estimate for an annual premium for a small situation like that?
Something like that, you're looking, and this is really not by any means a formal quote, but from small businesses, retail contractors with $1 to $2 million in revenue or so, they could start at about $300 to $400 for $100,000, $200,000 in coverage. Looking maybe $500 to $600 for $250,000 in coverage, upwards to $800 for $500,000, and $1,000 or more for about $1 million in coverage. You're looking probably $1,000 to $1,500. Really going to depend. Again, the class of business, your sales and number of employees really kind of drive some of that.
Yeah,
I've got my small contractor I just wrote cyber policy for. We did a $250,000 limit. They have about $1 million in sales, 6 employees. Their premium was $394 for $250,000.
And I think I only asked that just to put a broad estimate out there, because with a lot of things regarding cybersecurity, small business owners have so many other things going on. They're like, oh, this is another thing, and it's going to cost me a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. But it really is, and you're not the only person I've heard estimates from, but it really is affordable based on the kind of risk that you might be putting yourself.
It is. It's gotten a lot more affordable. The counterparties have been able to underwrite it a little bit more and get their risk analysis and understand the exposures a little bit more as well. One thing I want to bring up before I forget is in a lot of cases, you may have a general liability and property policy already in place. And those policies sometimes will have some built-in, what we call cyber coverage, but it's mainly going to be low limits, 10, 15, 20, maybe $50,000 in coverage. It's going to provide identity theft protection and maybe some data compromise. Typically, it won't cover the ransomware, the funds transfer fraud, the social engineering, and things of that nature. You can purchase a separate standalone cyber policy that's going to be a lot more robust and cover a lot broader perils, and you're not going to see much difference in premium. The contractor I just talked about, they had a built-in cyber on their general liability and property policy. It was $280, I believe, $275 for $50,000 in coverage. We wrote them a separate standalone $250,000 policy, much better coverage for what I say $394. So they were able to remove that from their property and liability policy at $275, and we wrote a policy for $394 or whatever for them, and they're in a lot better position.
Yeah. It just flew out of my head. You mentioned social engineering a couple of times, and we like to talk about current threats or known threats out there. Are there any social engineering claims that come to mind? Of course, without mentioning any names or anything, but some methods that you've seen lately.
Several, actually. Have a conversation with the client. We do their renewal, offer cyber. They only have 10 employees. 3 or 4 use the computer, have access to the computer. They say, we don't need it. We're small enough. I don't think we're going to need it. 7 months later, I get a call. Hey, Rob, remember when we talked about cyber insurance? I say, oh, yeah, I remember. And they had $130,000 cyber loss that was not covered. What happened in that instance, they received an email from a vendor stating, please change our bank information, submit any future payments to the new bank account. They went ahead and did what the email said, sent payment to the new bank account, and the vendor calls 30 days after the payment was due. Hey, we didn't see your payment. My client said, well, we did send it on this date to this bank account, and it was not the correct bank account. They did a trace on that deposit, on that payment. It went to a bank in Oklahoma, and from there it went overseas, and it's gone. So those are the types of things we're seeing. Ways to help from becoming a victim of that. If you get an email from somebody stating, please change our bank account information, call them and verify. Make sure you're reaching out to that individual or company to verify what they're sending you in an email is true. Do not call the phone number from the email you received saying, hey, change bank accounts, because that's another claim that I had. The individual did call the number, got a confirmation from the person, and sent the payment. Well, they called the phone number that was on the email that was sent to them stating to change the bank account. The hackers were on the other side of that line saying, yes, go ahead, we've changed our bank account, please remit payment. Don't reply to the email asking if this is true, and to verify, don't call numbers from that email. Use a separate resource to find the contact information and call to verify. I've had claims $130,000. We had a $220,000 claim last year. Another over $100,000. All same social engineering kind of scenarios. Those are really on the rise. Get an email and they can really play on an emotion or trick somebody into taking an action they normally wouldn't do. And before you know it, your money's gone.
Yeah, and I know of at least one scam where somebody's supervisor the email seemed like it was coming directly from the supervisor to make this ACH payment. luckily, we've been working with those people, and the first thing that person did was walk down the hall to their supervisor's office and say, hey, what's this? So
Yep.
check it offline before you take any actions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Rob, we're at the half-hour mark, and I totally appreciate your time today and expertise, and I think you have provided some good thoughts to people who may have not even had an idea what cybersecurity insurance is for or how to go about researching it. I think you've provided a lot of valuable information for us today, and I totally thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And I'll just give a shout out to everyone out there of our cybersecurity program. I'm going to flash up my email address here. Please reach out to me with any advising needs you might have regarding cybersecurity, and hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thanks again, Rob. Hope to see some of you again next month.
Thank you.